It was a Friday morning that seemed completely ordinary, the kind of day where you expect nothing more dramatic than deciding what to make for dinner. Michael was in the kitchen, sipping his coffee, when he casually dropped the news. He was heading to our beach house for an all-guys weekend, just like the old college days. He painted it as harmless nostalgia: sports, beer, card games, maybe a little too much junk food. His tone was light, almost overly smooth, like he'd practiced it in front of the mirror. I leaned against the counter, smiling like the picture-perfect wife, but in my head, I was already listening to that tiny, suspicious voice that had served me well over the years. I asked him for a list of the friends going. "Just in case something happens and I need to reach someone," I said, keeping it casual. Without a moment's pause, he grabbed a pen, jotted down the names, and left the paper right there on the table. I doubt he realized it, but that simple piece of paper was going to change everything. As he packed, I noticed his energy was different. Too much excitement for a weekend of bad beer and reruns of their glory days. He zipped up his bag, slid his sunglasses into his shirt collar, and kissed me goodbye with a grin that didn't feel quite right. When the door clicked shut behind him, I stood in the quiet kitchen, staring at that list on the table, already wondering if I'd just been handed the first clue to something I wasn't supposed to see. I picked up the list, running my finger over each name like I was memorizing them for a test. Some of these guys I'd met before, others I only knew from the stories Michael told: the wild nights, the stupid dares, the kind of antics they'd proudly relive over beers. I could almost hear their laughter echoing in my head, but for some reason it didn't make me smile. Instead, it felt like background noise to a story I didn't know yet. The house felt different without him. Too quiet. Too still. I made myself busy, loading the dishwasher, wiping the counters, trying not to think about why that list kept pulling at my attention. Every so often, I'd glance at it on the table, like it was daring me to do something. I told myself it was harmless, just names. But deep down, I knew that sometimes the smallest details could crack open the biggest secrets. I tried to shake it off, even poured myself another coffee to keep my mind occupied. But as I stood there sipping, my eyes kept drifting back to that paper. I didn't know it yet, but I wasn't going to leave it alone for long. And once I took the first step, there'd be no turning back to the woman I'd been that morning. By mid-morning, I had almost convinced myself to just toss the list into the drawer with the takeout menus and random receipts. Almost. But every time I passed the table, it was like those names were staring up at me, whispering that they might know something I didn't. I wasn't suspicious yet, not officially, at least that's what I told myself, but curiosity has a way of planting seeds, and mine had already started to grow roots. I thought about how easily Michael had handed it over. No hesitation, no second-guessing, no, "Why do you need it?" Most men, the guilty kind, would stall, make a joke, maybe even deflect. But not him. That was either a sign of complete innocence, or the confidence of someone who believed he'd covered his tracks too well. I wasn't sure which one scared me more, so I left the list exactly where it was and went about my day, pretending to forget about it. But inside, I was already making mental notes. I didn't know when or how, but I knew I was going to use it. And when I finally did, it wouldn't just answer my questions. It would unravel much more than Michael ever planned to hide. The next morning, I was cleaning up the living room when I spotted the list again, right where I'd left it. Sunlight from the window caught the edge of the paper, almost like it was deliberately calling my attention. I paused, coffee mug in hand, and stared at those names. That's when the thought hit me. I could look them up. Not as myself, of course. They'd never let me in if they saw my real name pop up in a friend request, but I had an old fake account I'd used once or twice for harmless snooping. Seemed like today was as good a day as any to dust it off. One by one, I typed their names into the search bar, scrolling through profile pictures, vacation posts, and years-old memes. Most of it was boring, the kind of thing you'd expect from middle-aged men trying to relive their youth online. But then I landed on Ryan's profile, the single one in the group, and that's when my stomach tightened. There it was, a photo posted just hours ago. The guys were on the beach house deck, beer bottles in hand, grinning at the camera. But my eyes went straight to the background. Two women in bright bikinis, laughing, walking past like they belonged there. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even trying to be. And it was definitely not part of the just the guys weekend Michael had described so vividly before leaving. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I stared at that picture longer than I should have, my thumb frozen on the screen. The guys were front and center, all smiles like nothing in the world could go wrong. But my focus kept drifting to those women in the background. One had a sun hat tilted just enough to hide her face. The other was tossing her hair back like she was in some kind of vacation ad. They weren't just passing through. Their body language screamed comfort, familiarity, belonging. I zoomed in, scanning for details. A towel draped over a chair, a half-empty margarita glass on the railing. This wasn't a random visit from neighbors. This was planned. My pulse picked up as I replayed Michael's all-guys speech in my head. The way he'd looked me right in the eye, smiling, promising that it was just like old times. I almost laughed at the irony. Old times, maybe, but not the kind he'd want me to know about. I set my phone down on the table, staring out the window while my mind churned. This wasn't proof of anything beyond bad judgment, yet. But my gut was louder now, pulsing like a warning siren I couldn't ignore. Something was off, and I knew, without a doubt, that I was going to find out exactly what. I picked the phone back up, my fingers drumming against the case while my mind pieced together a plan. If there were women in that photo, how many more weren't caught in the frame? And more importantly, how long had they been there? I thought about the way Michael had been almost giddy when packing, like a teenager sneaking out for something forbidden. Maybe this was what had him so eager, not the beer, not the poker, but the company he conveniently forgot to mention. I scrolled further down Ryan's feed, checking comments, likes, even the tags. A few of the guys from the list had interacted with the post, inside jokes, laughing emojis, not a single attempt to hide the scene. It was bold, almost careless, as if they were confident none of their partners would ever see it. They clearly underestimated how determined a suspicious woman could be. I closed the app and leaned back in my chair, the weight of what I'd seen settling in. My heart wasn't racing out of jealousy. It was something colder, sharper. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It was about truth. And if Michael had his secrets, I was going to expose them in a way he'd never forget. I pulled the list closer, my eyes moving from one name to the next, this time with a new purpose. It wasn't enough to just know the men who were there. I wanted to know the women connected to them. Girlfriends, fiancés, wives. The ones who deserved to see what I'd seen. It didn't take long. A quick search here, a mutual friend link there, and soon I had a lineup of their partners staring back at me from my screen. Each one, unknowingly, about to be invited into a conversation they never imagined having. I crafted my first message carefully, polite, calm, almost hesitant. I attached the photo from Ryan's profile and explained, in the simplest terms, what had caught my attention. I didn't accuse, I didn't rant, I just presented the scene for what it was. If they wanted to believe it was harmless, that was their choice. But I knew the truth would speak louder than anything I could say. One by one, the responses started trickling in. At first, confusion, then disbelief, and finally, the anger. Some were quick to lash out at me, as if shooting the messenger might make it untrue. Others thanked me, their words tight and clipped, like they were holding back a flood of emotion. I could feel the shift happening in real time, strangers finding themselves on the same side of a war they didn't start, but were suddenly ready to fight. Before I knew it, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Each reply brought a different shade of reaction. One woman admitted she'd already suspected something, another swore this was impossible, while a third sent back a single chilling sentence. I knew it. That one stayed with me. It wasn't shock. It was confirmation. And confirmation has a way of stripping away denial in seconds. It didn't take long for the group chat to form. I added each woman, introducing them with a short message. We need to talk. What started as hesitant exchanges turned into a rapid-fire back and forth of observations, confessions, and suspicions. Stories of strange late-night texts, sudden work trips, and unexplained expenses poured in. Each piece fit too neatly with the others, like we'd all been given fragments of the same ugly puzzle. By the end of that first hour, the disbelief had burned away, replaced with something heavier. Resolve. We weren't just going to sit at home wondering. We were going to see exactly what was happening behind those beach house walls, and the thought of showing up unannounced was starting to sound less like a wild idea, and more like the only logical next step. I dropped the address into the chat, my fingers tapping the screen with a steady calm that surprised even me. One by one, the little scene checkmarks appeared, followed by short confirmations. I'm in. Tell me when. Let's do it. There was no more hesitation. We'd crossed that invisible line between thinking about it and actually doing it. And once you step over that line, you don't go back. We worked out the details like we'd been planning this for weeks instead of minutes. Who could drive? Who had the time to get there? Who might need a friend to come along for backup? The more we talked, the more our anger started to take on a strange kind of unity, a sisterhood born from betrayal. None of us knew each other personally, yet in that moment we understood one another better than some of our closest friends ever could. By the time we signed off, there was a plan in motion. We'd meet, arrive together, and walk through that door as a single front. I didn't know exactly what we'd find, but one thing was certain. Michael and his friends weren't going to see this coming, and that thought alone was enough to keep me from second-guessing a single step. The drive down to the coast felt like it stretched for hours, even though I knew I was making good time. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, the hum of the engine mixing with the steady thud of my heartbeat. At the meeting spot, the other women were already gathering, some in their own cars, others riding together. Faces I'd only seen through a phone screen now stood in front of me, united by the same look in their eyes, determination sharpened by hurt. We barely exchanged pleasantries. It wasn't that we didn't care, it was that we didn't need to. Every one of us knew why we were there and what we were walking into. We agreed on the timing, lined up our cars, and set off toward the house like a convoy. The closer we got, the stronger the sound of distant music became, carried on the ocean breeze. When the beach house finally came into view, it looked almost like a postcard, sunlight spilling across the deck, laughter floating out toward us. But underneath that picture-perfect scene, my chest tightened, because I knew the truth hiding in there wasn't nearly as pretty. And in just a few moments, we were going to tear the lid off it for everyone to see. We parked just far enough away that no one inside could see us coming. As we stepped out, the music grew louder, bass thumping, laughter spilling over it, mixed with the unmistakable splash of someone jumping into the pool. The air smelled of salt water and something fruity, probably the cocktails I imagined were sweating in tall glasses out on the deck. We walked together toward the door, the gravel crunching under our feet in perfect, almost eerie sync. The front door wasn't locked. I pushed it open, and the scene hit me like a wave. Everywhere I looked, there were people. Men from the list, women I'd never seen before in barely their swimsuits, couples disappearing toward hallways that clearly didn't lead to the kitchen. Someone shouted over the music, a round of applause erupted from the living room, and then silence. It spread slowly, like the sound had been sucked out of the air as more and more faces turned toward us. Michael was the last to notice. He froze mid-laugh, a beer in his hand, his smile evaporating as his eyes locked on mine. I didn't break the stare. If anything, I let a slow, deliberate smirk form, the kind that said I already knew everything, and he was about to find out exactly how much. I stepped fully inside, the other women fanning out behind me like we'd rehearsed it. "You boys forgot to mention this was ladies included weekend," I said, my voice carrying easily over the sudden quiet. The words landed like a slap. A few of the women in bikinis shifted uncomfortably, while some of the men glanced at each other, scrambling for explanations that wouldn't come. The stillness broke all at once. One of the women from our group went straight for her boyfriend, demanding to know who the half-naked stranger on his lap was. Another spun on her heel and stormed back toward the door, tears in her eyes. Voices rose, accusations flew, and the music was abruptly cut. It was chaos, but not the kind you could clean up with a quick apology and a promise to talk later. Michael stayed rooted where he was, watching me like I'd just walked in with a loaded weapon. And in a way I had, not bullets, but the truth. and there was no coming back from the kind of hit I'd just delivered. Back home, the silence felt heavier than the confrontation itself. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and let the quiet wrap around me like armor. My phone was already buzzing, Michael's name lighting up the screen over and over, each call going unanswered. I didn't block him, not yet. Ignoring him felt more powerful, like I was setting the rules now and he was scrambling to keep up. By the next morning, the ripple effect had already started. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. The group chat was buzzing with updates. 2 relationships ended on the spot that day. Another woman kicked her fiancé out before he could unpack his bag. Photos from the beach house began circulating privately among friends of friends, each one confirming what we'd all seen with our own eyes. Michael tried everything: texts, voicemails, even a pathetic email, as if putting his words in writing might soften the damage. But I didn't need to hear his explanations. I'd already seen the truth without them. And the truth was enough to keep me from opening the door to him ever again. Over the next few days, it was like watching a domino line fall in slow motion. The once untouchable guys group started fracturing. Some tried to defend each other, others went radio silent, and a few had the nerve to blame us, as if walking in on their mess was somehow worse than creating it in the first place. The group chat with the women turned into a safe haven, a place where we traded not just updates, but encouragement. We were all moving through the same storm, but none of us were facing it alone anymore. I noticed how quickly the narrative around Michael began to shift. Friends who used to sing his praises now had nothing to say. Invitations stopped coming his way. Even the ones who stayed loyal kept their distance. Nobody wanted to be caught in the fallout. I didn't have to lift a finger. The social unraveling happened all on its own. Every night I'd see his name flash on my phone, sometimes with messages that went from begging to angry, then back to begging again. I never replied. Silence became my sharpest weapon, and I wielded it without hesitation. Because the moment I engaged, the moment I gave him even a sliver of my attention, he'd think he still had a place in my life. And that was no longer true. A week later, I found myself sitting on the beach with a few close friends, the ocean stretching wide and endless in front of us. The sun was warm on my skin, the air carrying that faint tang of salt and freedom. My phone buzzed on the table beside my drink, Michael's name lighting up the screen again. I didn't even hesitate. One tap, and the call was silenced without a glance at whatever desperate words he'd planned to say this time. I took a slow sip, letting the icy sweetness wash over my tongue. One of my friends raised an eyebrow, but I just smiled. If he wanted a boys' weekend, I said, setting the glass down, he should have kept it to the boys. Laughter rippled through our little circle, not cruel, just knowing. The kind of laugh you share when you've made it out of something messy with your dignity intact. The tide rolled in, pulling the shoreline back with it, and I thought about how quickly things can change. One list of names, one photo, one choice to act instead of ignore. Michael's life would never go back to what it was before that weekend, and neither would mine. And honestly, I liked it better this way.